Hey, good day, everyone. So grateful that you're here again for another Soul Care Life Class slash podcast episode, our Pain to Peace podcast with a beautiful new special guest today, Claire McFarlane. Thank you so much for being here. Um, I'd love to give you listeners and Claire a bit of a warm introduction in a second, and also would love to let you know that today's topic is how to transform trauma into triumph. And I believe that well, you're not only in for a treat, but also for a very beautiful, deep topic that I feel almost all of us have either a connection to ourselves or a close one next to us that can very much be going through something that we are going to talk about today. Also, I'd love to let you know that if you feel like asking us questions or want to find where our beautiful guest today can where you can find her beautiful work, make sure that you check the show notes, and also I hope you stay until the end. We might do a beautiful exercise and some gifts at the end, so please stay tuned. I'm grateful that you're here and spending your precious time with us, and we do not take that lightly. We're grateful that you're here again, or if this is for the first time, then welcome, dear one. I'm really excited to dive right into it. So let's begin here. Claire McFarlane is such a beautiful soul, a South African-born Australian lady, and also the founder of Footsteps to Inspire. She's peacefully campaigning to end sexual violence by running 16 kilometers of beach in every country of the world, and she has already inspired change in 59 countries. I mean, wow, what a powerhouse. Really beautiful, super inspiring. And Claire knows how hard it is to be a survivor of rape, because she has been through this herself. And I feel very much connected to this beautiful soul sister, as I have been through this myself as well. And I feel we're on a, well, pretty similar but different path, and also with a similar mission. And I'm really on that level also so grateful to get to connect with you, dear Claire, and to may well, touch each other's lives and missions in that sense. And what I very much love is how you open the dialogue by sharing your own transformational story, and how you openly invite others to join you in this, and how you've become a voice of hope for many, and that you've even been recognized as an expert on the issue of sexual violence, because not only have you been connecting organizations, government services, and then the survivors themselves. You've also been impacting wider spread communities, I guess, to say it that way. You've been invited twice to speak at TEDx. And Elle magazine nominated you as one of 50 incredible women shaping the continent of Africa. And you're even the ambassador for peace. And I mean, wow. Look at you go, girl. So I'm more than honored to make connect. And I'm just checking in before we dive into today's beautiful conversation, really. Did I leave out on anything, or would you like to start by adding something maybe here?
No, I think that was good to get going. Thank you. And it's great to be here with you, Feline. I'm very honored as well.
Thank you so much. Well, just to repeat one more time, today's topic: how to transform trauma into triumph. Yeah, I'd love to start off diving into our conversation today with asking you, yeah, what is the meaning for you around this topic? What does it mean to you, and how did it come, your drive? So that's two questions, but let's start with the meaning.
Well, I guess the meaning, because I've recognized that my story, and we'll probably learn a bit more about it as we talk, is not everybody's story. And I'm really grateful, because my story's a kind of worst, everyone's worst nightmare, really, if you want to put it that way. But the thing is that I've recognized and realized, and even from other life experiences, that we're thrown curveballs all the time in life, and how we choose to handle those is how we move forward in the world. And at the time, it can be really difficult to navigate. It can be really hard. It can feel heavy and constraining. But if we're able to transform that in some way, we have this beautiful ability of not only just healing, but really transforming our lives and turning it into something that is like triumph. And it certainly doesn't have to be what I'm doing. But the fact that we can keep moving forward and keep thriving in our everyday lives, that's triumph. And if we can keep touching the lives of others. So for me, that's really sort of how I see the definition is honoring the curveball, honoring the experience, honoring the trauma, but not letting it be a lifetime of suffering, and figuring out how you transform it into something else.
All goosebumps here. Yes.
It's so easy to say. I do realize and recognize that it's, and I think no matter how much we understand it, there's always those moments in life where when you're deep in something that doesn't feel good, you are deep in something that doesn't feel good. And it's sometimes hard to, but I think the more that one becomes conscious and aware of the tools around us and the way of moving forward, then that challenge and that difficult time becomes a lot easier to turn around.
Yes. Yes, I love how you open up by sharing the meaning to you, and also to keep it real. I mean, people listening to this could be just starting this journey of finding out what tools are out there and how they can be of service to them as they start this path of healing. And so it's so beautiful to also touch base on the fact that listening to us today might be showing or watching this video. It could be that that if you compare yourself to where Claire stands for now, for example, that it might be it could then look like, oh, you have to be there already, right? But it could take years. And then, just to be honest here, it took me years. I've just let's say, closing is a wrong word, but I've just closed a part of one of my own chapters by facing one of my perpetrators just 3 weeks ago. And this was a really intense experience, and I just felt like opening up also this from my side to help you, Claire, and also the listeners, to show you that it took me from 16 years old to now so that's almost 18 years to go face this person, and it took me years of inner work, and also some years of not so much inner work or not being ready yet, and years of silence. Let's just keep it real here. So it's a journey, and it's different for everyone. So that could also be very much different for you if you're listening here, or people around you, if you know someone. And there's no fixed time for it, and it's very much your path, and you may do it the way you want to. That felt like sharing that and tapping in on that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. how, if you want to go there yet, so just go wherever you feel comfortable with. Also for you, Claire, how has this topic, how to transform trauma into triumph, how has it been born into what you do now? And could you maybe take us along on your journey? Because I believe that's probably a long answer to a short question, but that's all good. We have the time for that. like what has your
Yeah.
journey been like? Would you take us with you?
Yes,
With
definitely. Yeah, and please do maybe because it's I recognize that I'll just be talking for a while, so please feel free to ask a
Sure,
question or interrupt.
will do. Okay, thank you.
So I guess it's really interesting because the whole idea of transforming trauma into triumph is something that I did very naturally and instinctually based on circumstances that were around me. And I feel very, very grateful for that I was given that kind of gift in my life, given everything else that was happening. And so it's been really interesting stepping back and analyzing it more in an analytical way and turning it into something. But it all starts back for me, and I guess with regards to what I'm doing by running 16 kilometers of beach in every country of the world with this vision of ending sexual violence, comes from my personal story of survival, of surviving rape, and also surviving other trauma in my life. And so I'll just very briefly explain what happened. But when I was 21, I had actually, when I was 19 years old, I'll go back to 19. When I was 19 years old, I'd done my first year of university. And actually, maybe I should go back even a further step. I moved to Australia when I was 16.
Okay. Yes.
So I grew up in South Africa. I grew up in Johannesburg, which for many people listening, they may have been to Johannesburg, they may not have, but Johannesburg is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. So the notion of violence, the notion of danger, the notion of threat is ever present. And from the day you're born, quite literally as a child in the world, you are prepared to face danger and violence. And there was a lot going on. It was during apartheid. So there's just these levels of violence that were sort of always ever present in my life. And then we moved to Australia when I was 16, which was an incredible experience, very daunting. And nerve-wracking, but ultimately liberating. And I got to taste what I would call freedom for the first time, not having to be worrying about my safety all the time. But unfortunately, violence had sort of carried its way through with me because I did have a lot of violence in my home. And so that I couldn't get away from. So I had done my first year of university in Australia. And I guess I was a bit fed up with, I needed to break away from the violence and then sort of forge a life that I wanted to lead. Because when you're a child, it's very difficult when your caregivers have created a certain environment because you can't escape that. Yet it impacts you every single day. So at 19, a friend had actually invited me, a friend I'd been studying with at university said, Claire, let's go and live in Paris for a year. I want to be an au pair. This friend spoke really good French. I knew nothing about France. I had no clue. I really had no notion of the language or the culture. But I just loved this idea of going on this huge adventure at 19. I was financially independent. I'd been working while studying, so I knew that I could afford to do this. And so off I went, 19, landed in Paris for this really, big adventure, which it was amazing. If you could imagine a South African, Australian young woman debarking in Paris at 19, coming of age, I couldn't imagine anything more amazing. And so it was really incredible sort of start. I picked up the language really quickly. I realized very early on that I'd always enjoyed art as well. So I was very passionate about art. So I'd actually decided to change my stream of study and enroll in the fine arts school in Paris. So I was doing preparation for that. Yeah, and I had a job because I had to auto fund. And this is kind of an important part because it's, sort of what happened next. So I'd been in Paris for about a year and a half So I was 21. It was the middle of 1999, a long time ago. My friend had actually gone back to Australia, but I, of course, was, Paris was now my future. And I was walking home after work one night. Well, not walking home, but walking to get a taxi.
Mhm.
And I was intercepted by a man. Extremely violent attack. His first thing he tried to do was murder me. Now, I've grown up in South Africa and my instincts of survival are very, very strong. So I went into a very quick, I went straight into fight, save my life, get away from this. And I also realized that he wasn't grabbing me to murder me and steal my money. I really knew that this was going to be sexual violence, it's going to be rape. And so when you understand that, you just want to get away. Unfortunately, my fight didn't bode well for me because it did mean the violence of the attack escalated. He was very well prepared. He was armed with weapons. He had a gun, he had a knife, he used a can of pepper spray.
He used that on
And
you.
he actually used it as a weapon. So in his, like, to punch me. So as something to make the, and there was a point during the struggle of me trying to get away where I fell to the ground. And this is a very marked moment for me because he stood over me and strangled me. And I had a near-death experience. So I was very much in the mind of fighting to get away. And then there was this moment of peace that came over me. And I realized that I was going to die. And that my family would have to come and identify me in a morgue naked in Paris. And then I was okay with that. And it was the weirdest experience because I just was like, okay, I have to let go now and step over. And I stepped over into the light. And that's when I blacked out. I was gone, unconscious. I think that moment was really profound because the fact of letting go is what meant that he stopped strangling me. And it's actually, I didn't die. I stayed unconscious for a while and then came to with him dragging me along the ground by my hair. I knew he was taking me somewhere. It felt very premeditated. And it was interesting. Now you've got adrenaline running through your system. And I went straight away. I came to and I was like, oh, wow. I was like, okay, I'm not dead, but I'm still, this man's still here and my life's still at risk and I have to get away. So I went straight into that fight mode again, which really was brutal. And there was a point where, he had been able to take me off the street. He obviously had a spot where he knew he was taking me. And this is when the rape began. And there was one particular moment where I tried to get up and run away and he hit me very hard in my eye. And that caused a very loud sound. And I realized, I was like, wow, Clay, if you keep trying to fight him like this physically, you're going to die in a very brutal, horrible way. And I need to do something else to get away from this. And so, and I share this because it's really profound and it's amazing how we can actually survive something like this ourselves if we just trust in ourselves. And I remembered something from high school. So in high school in Australia, we'd had this week of self-defense, which none of that helped me. None of that technique helped me, but something from it did, because we had a talk. We had someone that had been a survivor of violence come and share kind of like a talk for entering life as a woman, basically, and also shared techniques of escaping dangerous situations other than using physical force. And that was to talk to the perpetrator. And I remembered this. And that's, so while now I'm naked on the ground and he's on top of me and the rape's begun and I've got this going on in my head, and I thought I have to tell him I'm sick. And he was from Africa. So I knew that I couldn't say I had HIV because I really wanted to say I had HIV. But I was like, no, he may have it and not care. So my next reflex was to say I was terminally ill. I told him I was terminally ill with an illness that was killing me. And this is how the dialogue started, which was really kind of a very strange thing. But what it did, it certainly didn't stop this rape. It didn't stop the attack. It didn't stop the violence, because there were moments during this conversation where he didn't believe me and he became violent again. But what it did do was it saved my life that night, because there was a moment after the first rape, because he wanted to rape me a second time. And I just quite literally begged him to let me go and just said, please have some compassion. I'm going to be dead by the end of the year. And I was crying, and I was saying to myself on the inside, Claire, you have to believe the story you've just invented. And there was also one other particular moment where he asked me where I was from. He'd heard that I wasn't from France. And I actually said to him I was from Africa. And I knew didn't fall well for him. I could see that disrupted his way of thinking. And so those two things, he walked away, and he didn't rape me a second time and left me alive. Wow. Which was so very, very, long, difficult experience in that regard. But now I'm in Paris, and I'm naked on the streets, and I'm injured, and I'm terrified. And I remember having heard these terrible stories about rape and how it was handled in France. And I was like, wow, Claire, what do you do now? Do you go home and pretend this never happened? Or do you go and get help? And then my logical mind went, well, you're actually really injured, and maybe your injuries are still life-threatening. Yeah. You need to go to hospital. And so that was a very profound moment where I actually had to make a decision. And that decision was to face what comes next as a rape survivor. Yeah. And what comes next, and I feel very comfortable saying this, particularly in France, is sometimes worse or equal to what happened to me during the rape. It was a very difficult journey. And so, I faced the aftermath. And I call it an aftermath because I waited 5 hours in ER before a doctor came to see me. The doctor looked just like the man that had attacked me.
Oh my God.
Sounded just like him. First thing he said to me was, I must have done something to cause it. Must have been my fault. And I remember then, and I would say in maybe potentially another kind of potential like accident or something like that wouldn't matter, what the doctor looked like or sounded like. But when, like that kind of thing can be just the tipping point. And so then again, another profound moment in hospital was, I was like, wow, Claire, you're going to have to brace yourself here and not let what comes next kill you, because it could. It's a very difficult journey through that. I was really injured. I had to have a lot of medical follow-up, exposed to really high risk of catching HIV. So I had to go on prophylactics, which is the prevention medication for HIV. It was the very first year it had come out. So it was very new. So it's not quite like what it is today. It's definitely gotten a lot better to take. It was a very difficult experience. And I had to take sort of the highest dose for the longest period of time. And then on the other side, the police are now very engaged because I find out that I wasn't the first victim. He'd done this before in the exact same spot, and the police hadn't warned anyone in the area. So that sense of feeling like I was collateral damage, because I asked him, I said, why didn't you tell anyone and warn anyone? There's backpackers and students, and there's so many potential, targets for this man. And they said they didn't want to scare him away. And so it was like, that was a really horrible feeling. So I actually got my colleagues from work to, everyone knew me. I'd been working there long enough, and everyone knew me and I think respected me in the whole street. So I asked my colleagues, I said, tell them what happened to me. I'm not ashamed of what happened to me. And just get them to warn, particularly women in the area, just that this is, he's out there still. But the police, of
Yeah.
course, were very, very now really freaking out, because now we've got attempted murder, rape, it's escalated. There's a really serious serial rapist on their hands. And so they were very engaged. So in one side, it was potentially positive outcome, yet they weren't trauma informed when it came to sexual violence. So the police experience was, and they were panicking. So, like I stayed in hospital for a few nights, and they were actually in the hospital, I say interrogating me, because it did feel like an interrogation, more like up to 3 times. Never offered an interpreter. There's this whole process. But yet they were very active to try and catch him, but they didn't catch him. And so after I'd had the medical follow-up, it was 3 months, I was like, I'm scared. I'm terrified. I guess working with the police really showed me how bad the problem of sexual violence and rape was in Paris at that time, how little people were talking about it. And I was like, wow, if I stay here as a student, I'm going to have to work at nighttime to fund my studies and my life here, which means I'm constantly going to be putting myself at risk. And this could happen again. And I was really scared. So I made a really difficult decision to sort of leave my dream of becoming an artist behind in Paris and going back to Australia and sort of restarting and piecing back together my life. And so at the start of 2000, I went back to Australia, and Australia has a really good victim support program. But because I was raped overseas, I couldn't access it.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, which is not all countries are like that, but some are. And so I had no money, and I was like, well, I think, and the other thing is I was alive. I'd had this near-death experience. I'd saved my life. So when on one side, it's really empowering in this weird way. And I was like, well, I do have a choice here. Either I go with this thing that I'm alive and I save my life and live my life to the fullest, or I keep letting it destroy my life. And so for me, the first option just seemed like the only option. And so that's kind of how I proceeded. And I chose a typical technique, which is get so busy that you have no time to think about what happened to you.
Yes. Yeah. We have our techniques after these experiences, huh?
Oh, absolutely. And it is a form of denial. I never denied the rape, but I did deny the fact that it had impacted me in any way. I never gave my chance the self to look at, see how it had affected my life. And I certainly didn't give myself any time to think about, like, that first year back in Australia. I went to back to university. I went to an art college to try and do some art. I had 4 jobs. I became a dive master. It was all in 1 year.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Crazy. Yes. But it was a really good, at the time, and this is what I always say to anyone who's gone through trauma, we choose the coping strategies that we need at the time to help us get through. And that's what I needed at that time. Yet that was my coping strategy for 10 years.
That's quite a while, yes.
And so for 10 years, this is kind of how I lived my life. If you can imagine, though, it was a very fulfilling in one aspect, because when you're so busy and you're doing so much to keep yourself occupied, you do a lot of interesting things.
Yes.
And I ended up traveling, living overseas, working, having very interesting jobs. And then quite literally, so it was 10, we're talking like 10 years later. So 2009, I find myself living in Switzerland, in Geneva. So I'm back in Europe, and I had actually my brother was over in Europe for his birthday, his 30th birthday, and we'd never really talked about what had happened to me. My family wasn't really able to support me through what happened, which is very common. And actually, someone had quite early on in my journey had said that to me, said, your family may not be able to be the support mechanism that you need.
Yes.
And so that was really helpful, because it made me sad, but I also recognized that I had come from a lot of trauma in my own family, and they were then having this trauma experience with regards to what happened to me, and they just couldn't cope. And so their way of coping was not to talk about it. And I guess I was also just in my frame of like, let's not talk about it. And so it was interesting.
If it's okay with you, Claire, just to pause just a little bit on this point, because I feel this is so important for people listening. thank you so much for sharing all this, Claire, for going into this depth and for opening up and for opening up this conversation. It touches me so much on many layers, getting goosebumps all over. Really impressed by your strength, your courage, the power. Wow, woman. Yes, it moves me, and not only does it touch some personal things for me, but also seeing you shine your light and sharing about the near-death experiences. I totally resonate with it, and I feel it's so important that you point all that out, because I feel this could be so helpful for people listening to understand either themselves if they've been through it, or maybe understand just slightly better the people around them or family members. And as you touched on families, and sometimes that it's actually really common that how do you say that, family of origin might not be the support system that us survivors actually need or think we need. I just felt like tapping or touching base on that just for a little bit, because I resonate with it. It happened for me too, and I of course love all of the beautiful members of this family that I've been born in. And yes, it has been very painful also in a way to maybe not on that point find the support where we hope to find it. And it often touches, as I have a background as a therapist, working with systems in that way and understanding family systems I'm talking about now. And what we often see is that it goes sexual violence and how to cope with it. It's a pain that travels through families, let's just say it that way. So it's often intergenerational. And so when one of the children born has the light and the courage to feel and heal and therefore express themselves on this, it can often trigger their surroundings and things that have not been felt and dealt with or coped with in either parents or siblings or aunts, uncles, or grandparents. And this is, I now kind of see it as the child that dares to open up the conversation is often such a, kind of carrier of light in that sense, and bringing some light into dark places also in family systems. And it's a big task, and it can be so daunting to step up and speak up, and especially when it comes to our families. It's often the place where we hide ourselves in silence, if that's what we've learned from our caregivers. And so I just wanted to touch base on it and let you, Claire, know, but also the listeners, like, hey, you're doing an amazing job there, and you're doing the best you can, and you're not alone in that.
Yeah, and look, I mean, to be honest, it's a bit more complex than that as well with families, because
Yes.
it's very, like, particularly with sexual violence specifically, but I think potentially any kind of crime.
Yes.
That is a very physical crime. So it could be like a mugging or maybe murder. It's called secondary trauma, and it basically means that anyone in the victim's life, and I use the word victim because at that stage they are a victim, is going to be impacted by what has happened to that person they know. And they've been doing a lot of research on it, and the research is very clear that basically anyone in the victim's life will often experience the same trauma that the victim's going through themselves. But we don't have a system that honors it and recognizes it well enough. And there's no support system for the supporters of the victim, right? There's often they're expected to even be stronger, and they can't always be that, because they have a lot of their own traumas and baggages as well that they're dealing with. And also, if you think about it, and that's why I'm, because my family now is they're not very vocal supporters of what I do now, but they're definitely 100% behind what I do now. And it's taken, you know, my journey as well for them to get there. But
Yeah.
if I think about my brother and I think about my mom and I think my dad, who was alive at that time, you know, here's this person that is part of their direct family network, regardless of any of the life stuff we've had going on, they still love you. And the worst possible thing that can happen to your sister or your child has just happened. Like I can't even imagine the pain that they were feeling, you know, they probably, you know, sometimes they don't even know how to process it. So, you know, and I really recognize that a lot. I get a lot of parents that write to me now, because they don't know how to help their children and they're grappling. They're totally grappling, and they, you know, so yeah, so I think I know this sounds strange, but as someone who survived something, if we see that our family can't help us, it is more powerful for us to recognize that and find support and help from somewhere else.
Yes.
Rather than expecting help from our family when they can't give it, because it just weakens us. So, and I think that's, you know, and it doesn't, some people would argue with me and go, but that's not what the victim's meant to do. But it's not about that. It's not exactly.
Not about that. It's not about that. And also it's about, I'm just throwing in one tool that I loved working with and still love working with. It's called The Work by Byron Katie. A beautiful tool to do forgiveness work and healing on the physical level as well. And one thing that she says is it's not reality, so it weakens us in that sense. Like we are fighting reality if we keep on expecting it from people that are not able to get to give it to us. And the only one that can give me what I need is myself. And to take some ownership and kind of get take responsibility for my well-being is then the road to go, right? And I get to find the help and find it where it is possible to get it. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. And you are very allowed to feel sad if you don't get it from the people you want it from. That's okay too.
Sure. Yes.
You know, like honoring, you know, we talk sometimes about the child inside, but honoring that child's, you know, sadness or lack, or you know, there's no shame in that at all. But not letting it debilitate us and hold us back. So yeah, definitely. So shall we go back to 2009?
Yes, I'd love for you to take us back there. Yes.
Time machine back. So we go back to 2009, which is 10 years after the rape. And I'm with my brother, and quite literally it was about 2 weeks before the 10-year mark of the actual date of what had happened to me.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation, and we were just like, sort of said it would be really, I sort of said, well, it's 10 years for me. It might be a chapter that I need to close in my life, possibly go and have some counseling, because I've never really had counseling, but now I'm financially in a position where I can do it, you know, just to close it. And then my brother had been, it'll be really nice to talk to you about it. And then, so we had this conversation, and quite literally the next day, I get a call from the French police in Paris.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know I haven't committed any crime in France, right? Not that I know of. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is to do with the rape. And then they said to me, like, Mademoiselle McFarlane, can you get to Paris within 48 hours to do a lineup? We think we've caught the man.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was just like, sure. I was in Europe. I wasn't far away. I could jump on a TGV. I could say to work there'd been an emergency. And that's what I did. And I got to Paris in that 48 hours. And I went straight back to the same police station, same floor, same lift that broke down. Like, it was just like all like going back to that 10 years before, and the trauma of that experience afterwards, you know, this aftermath. And it's not like TV in France. I don't know, maybe other countries, but in France, one-way glass situation is not like on the television, on any of the detective shows. It's very rudimentary, very basic, very badly put together because they're like walking the criminals into the room at the same time they're bringing me into the adjacent room, and you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I'm
Oh my
not going to
God.
hide around the corner right now. But anyway, so I look through the glass and I look at, like, I think there were like 7 men lined up,
Mhm.
and there he is. Like, I
Mhm.
just recognized him.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, I didn't think that I would remember him after 10 years. To be doubly sure, because I had a lot of conversation with this man, and he had actually, during the initial start of the attack, when I was trying to get away, he was screaming shut up to me in French, which is tais-toi, because I was making so much noise. So I actually said to the police officers, I'm going to close my eyes. I want you to ask this number to step forward and scream tais-toi, tais-toi over and over again. And then that was like, you know, the minute I did that, I was taken straight back to that experience. So he was also identified by another victim. They only had 2 very solid DNA cases, even though there were other victims, but there were only 2 where the DNA had made it through for the 10 years later.
Yes.
And it was him. Like they do the check and everything like that. And so then the next big step of the journey begins, because I find out that in Paris, rape is not seen as a crime against the state. They couldn't do attempted murder because, unfortunately, the evidence, it's much harder to, they found some of the weapons that I had identified in my statements, but they couldn't put those weapons at the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't go in for attempted murder. They could only go in for rape. They were trying to do aggravated rape, but that was just proving hard. So it had to be just a straight rape case, which meant that it's not a crime against the state. So what does that mean? That basically means that it's seen as a crime against the person. So it's civil, and it's seen as a crime against the victim, and the victim has to prosecute. And if the victim chooses not to prosecute, they let the perpetrator walk free.
That's how they do it in the Netherlands as well. Just pointing that out. Yeah.
So, which is very different to a system I know in Australia or South Africa or other parts of the world, where a victim is seen as a witness for the state, and it's the state that prosecutes. There's some pluses and minuses to that system as well. I know that quite deeply now because of the work I do. But what it does mean, though, when you have to do it this way and decide to prosecute, is that the victim has to be implicated 100% the entire time. You have to cover all of the costs involved with it. And you don't know how long it's going to go for. So I had to make a choice. I had to decide if I wanted to do that. I think what really set me up for making the decision was that they caught him 2 weeks before the 10-year mark. And the 10-year mark in France is the statutory period of limitations. So that's the time frame someone can be tried for a rape crime in France.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a very big sign from the universe that I needed to go ahead with this. Like, you know, they didn't catch him 10 days later. They caught him like quite literally before that. And so I said yes. I didn't know what I was saying yes to. It was probably even worse than the aftermath after the rape. The justice process lasted 6 years.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. And cost me all of my life savings. And quite literally, I really didn't. I had to be implicated 100%. There wasn't a time where I could not go to a call to be questioned or have some sort of assessment done. And that happened a lot. They were building up this case. And so it was really hard. It's like one of the hardest experiences I've ever had to go through, like darkest times I've ever been to, because now I'm reliving this trauma. And probably for the very first time, I'm looking at it in minute detail over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I'm having to look at it, how it had impacted my life. I had to actually sit down and look at those 10 years of denial and go, oh my gosh, a lot of my decision-making was impacted by this. And I caused harm to myself because of what happened to me. Yet on the other side, I had this job in Switzerland that was a pretty important job. I wasn't replaceable because of my security clearance that I had. And so taking time off was very challenging. So I had this very little support or structure that allowed me to be or fall apart. I had to pretend that I was like completely all together. And that's really hard. Like when you're breaking up on the inside, and then you've got to pretend you're okay. The other thing that happened was because all of my finances were going into the justice process. And I was living in Switzerland, which isn't a social medical system. It's more like what Australia is. You have private medical. Rape is not seen. It's seen as a pre-existing condition. So it means that you cannot have any medical claims covered by your health insurance linked to it. Yeah, so it meant that I couldn't actually claim back any psychological support, and Switzerland's extremely expensive. That would have been 200, 300 euros per session. So I had a choice. Either I pay for the justice process or I pay for the support. And I guess I'd already picked the justice process. So I had to actually, but I don't see this as a bad thing, because I had to go down a very different road to heal. And I had to figure out other ways of healing and other strategies. And I'm so incredibly grateful that it actually worked out like that, because the moment I really hit rock bottom, where I contemplated sort of ending my days, but made the choice not to, because I was like, no, if I end my life now, this man wins. Like, he's, and I've no, I survived it. I survived all of these years. I'm going to survive it now. And so making that decision to heal, and then the resources and the tools and the books, I did a lot of reading, all of that started to come into my path, and all of it at the very right time, and everything that I needed. And so I got to have this extremely transformative healing journey that allowed me to heal not only on a psychological level, but I healed physically in my body. I healed my soul as well, which is really important.
And just pointing out to everyone, yes, that is possible. Being healed myself here too, and it's also possible for you. Yes,
totally. And and having to also, the interesting thing is when you relive a trauma, it can often bring up all the other traumas. So I had to bring up and work with all the trauma from my childhood too.
Yes.
So that was amazing and profound. So even though this justice process lasted 6 years, extremely difficult, sort of tearing me apart, it also allowed me to build myself back up and become the person I am today. And I do not regret that person at all. I'm very proud of who I am, and I'm so grateful that I've had that journey and this experience to bring me here. But the one thing I did do, and I thought was really important to do at the end, towards the end of, well, there was a motivating factor, because by the time, with regards to the criminal process, the justice process, there'd been a criminal hearing and an outcome. So 3 years into the process, and then there was an appeal. And I was starting to run out of money because by then I'd already spent 50,000 euros on putting him in jail. And so, but the appeal was really important, because if I won the appeal, they would actually have to amend the law in France.
Wow.
And that's when my story no longer became about me. It became about other survivors. And I was like, wow, because it'll create jurisprudence, like a precedent, legal precedent. And so my lawyer had actually sort of said to me, if you've got the strength to do this, please see it through to the end.
Wow. I get it.
So I was like, okay. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I sometimes think I was crazy. I don't like, sometimes I'm like, oh, wow. Because again, it was uprooting my life again, costing me more money. And so I actually, on the advice of a few people, decided to start a crowdfunding campaign to try and cover some of the expenses, because what happened was I would have to go back to France. I'd have to leave my job. There are all these things happening. And so, but that meant that I'd have to speak out. I'd actually have to share my story.
Yeah.
And that again was another big choice. Like I had there was all these moments of the story is very marked with making these decisions, and making these choices.
Yeah.
And I sort of sat down and went, and I didn't have a lot of time. I only had probably about 2 days to make this decision. I was like, if I choose to speak out about my story, I have to be ready to face what comes next. And I have to be ready to face both sides. I'm going to get people that are going to support me and think that I'm incredible, but I'm going to have people that might criticize me and be negative and judge me and blame me. Can I handle both?
Yes.
Do I have the capacity? And the negative is going to feel way worse than the supportive, right? It's going to hit you harder. Like, can I take those hits? And I was like, yeah, I can. I feel like I've healed. I feel like I've come. I felt like I'd really transformed what had happened to me. That I was capable of doing that. And so this was a big moment, because this is the moment my story went public, and it ran in a newspaper in Australia, a newspaper that also had an online platform, and the story traveled the world. And I guess what came next surprised me, but was so incredible. And that is that I had all these survivors start writing to me. And I didn't know the power of my story would do that. I just, you kind of just think you're just this, well, I guess the system makes you feel like you're not very significant in all of this,
Yes, and those years are dark and hard, and you go through it, and most of it on your own, and most of it pretending that you're okay, but falling apart on the inside. So you can't even comprehend that at some point it will be so worth it, because you're helping so much people.
I know, and that it would resonate for so many people, and I think it blew me away. I just got so many stories, and I think 2 things that stood out for me. One was that I was getting stories not just from women. I was getting men writing to me, and I was getting children writing to me.
Yeah.
That hit hard, because I had never thought men. I hadn't sat with that thought before, that men could be survivors of rape and sexual violence.
And very much so, yes.
Oh, and absolutely. And the children would just hit me hard, because these are children writing to me. Yeah. And then the other thing that stood out was that all of our stories were different. There were so many different shades of sexual violence. However, there's this one thing that seemed to unify us across, no matter what country or no matter where someone was the aftermath. Was how hard it was to be a survivor of sexual violence, how hard it was to access healing, how hard it was to get any kind of justice outcome, whatever that might look like, how hard it was to get the support that you needed, or to be believed, not be blamed and judged. So basically deprived of one's right to heal and to transform. Yes. And I just was like, why? Like this seems like such a simple thing, that you can transform someone's life. This terrible thing can happen. For many people, it's seen as one of the worst crimes that could ever possibly happen, worse than torture, worse than death. And so it disempowers so many people. So many people see no life after rape or sexual violence. Yet if they could access healing and support services and get an outcome of some kind, they can claim back their power and really live a full, wonderful life. Yes. It doesn't have to be so destructive. Yet we have these systems set up that don't allow that. So that was that's something I was like, I really need to do something. And so, and this is kind of what brings me being here and doing Footsteps to Inspire. I was like, I need to open a dialogue around sexual violence, but a dialogue that uses a way that takes a really uncomfortable topic. So this was before Me Too movement had started. So I think since the Me Too movement, conversations around sexual violence have changed. But before that, it was like just this taboo topic that no one wanted to talk about, made people uncomfortable. So I was like, well, what can I do? And this is where the idea of sport came in. I thought, I need to use sport. And I thought, well, why don't I use running? Running had been really instrumental in helping me. I'd never been a runner, but I'd actually turned to running to help me through that justice process. And it was part of my body healing process. Yeah,
the physical
and then
healing.
The physical, because we carry so much trauma just in our bodies that needs to be released. Yes. And not and physical movement can release that without having to access the memories. and cause
Exactly.
ourselves more trauma. Yeah.
And just point from a holistic point of view, we can carry trauma on a mental level, right? Our thoughts and our thought processes, which can impact how we feel emotionally, and kind of on the spirit level, if you energy level even. And then we have the physical level, which can the manifestations of trauma physically can show up as aches and pains, or extreme tiredness or stress. It shows up in different ways, and just putting that out here, like,
yeah, actually, even it goes deeper than that again as well.
yes.
So because the thing is, it may not show up. We may actually be tough enough to deal with it, but
Yeah.
again, they've been doing a lot of very into all the scientific research, because I guess I'm, I've just been very curious about my healing mechanism, and I there's always this need to sort of found it in some sort of research, but
Yes, same here.
they are finding that the body stores more trauma than, like, this is the memory machine, and memories can actually be changed based on how we think about, like, if you think about it, if right now you're looking at me on the screen, but if you shifted angles, everything about what you're looking at could change. Or listening, exactly. But something changes, and that will leave a different memory in your mind. So trauma in the mind is something that can actually be it's quite a different machine, but we hold about 70% of trauma in our bodies.
Exactly. Yes.
And it can just sit there, but it can also be triggering for the mind. So what happens is something might happen. You may not physically feel something, but it might then trigger a whole series of memories, and then trauma comes back up. And but the beautiful thing about physical release of trauma, and like releasing it from your body, is that it can be trauma release that doesn't need to involve invoking memories. And so it can be very powerful in the sense that you don't have to feel pain when you're doing it, or that sense of like hurt or reliving the harm, but yet you can have a release, and it's like almost like something just disappears and goes away, or it transforms, it changes, it no longer becomes as powerful over us. So it's really interesting. So the running, and then I was like, I really need to turn this into something that people are going to talk about, because like, this is a difficult topic. So I thought, well, why don't I make it a very big challenge? I picked beaches because beaches are very metaphorical for me, and also because they're very representative. Running on a beach is extremely hard, and is very representative of life. Like, you might have this beautiful hard patch of sand, and then you hit this really soft patch, and it's so hard, or the wind comes up. And it's like, that's like life. You hit these rough moments in life, and then you dig deep, you go in, and you see what kind of resources you have on the inside to sort of keep going and keep getting through. And then remarkably, you do get through and get to the other side. So it had this metaphor for that, but also it's a very beautiful place of healing and restoration. Just the idea of shells breaking down into sand, and going back to this whole idea of renewal and transformation. And it's a place, I mean, most people are happy at the beach. You see people smiling, and I get that asked a lot now, particularly by the media. They always go to me when they see the photos from the running. They're like, everyone looks so happy, yet they're running for a very difficult issue. I'm like, yeah, well, it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, but we are at the beach.
Yes, we make it just a fun day. We're going through so many hard times already, right? Let's make
Totally. And it's about making
memory.
something uncomfortable comfortable. And this is, and then the other thing for me, I wanted it to be as inclusive as possible. And in my mind, I thought, if I run somewhere where no one has money, like not even enough money to have a pair of shoes, they can still come and run with me on the beach, because you can be barefoot.
I love that.
So kind of, this is 2016 is when I embarked on Footsteps to Inspire, and began this journey of running 16 kilometers. And so the 16 is my story. From the day I was raped to the day there was a final justice outcome, 16 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I wanted some symbolism for me in that. And then with this vision of going to every country in the world, I've reached 59, and country 59 was the Netherlands.
Woohoo! Yay!
Yay! So
Just
far.
feeling slightly proud of that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And it's
And
definitely
wow.
evolved and changed and become, something very different to what I thought. Like, no one's ever done this before, so there's no precedent for me to follow.
Mm.
And there's been a lot of learning, a lot of hardship.
Wow. Yes. You trailblazer,
Yeah.
you. Wow.
Yeah. And it's unfortunately it's a space where there's very little funding and money. So a lot of I keep self-funding a lot of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's so amazing because today it's really profound today, because this week's been a bit of a turning point. I sort of have hit a moment where I'm questioning, because when this is a topic that gets resistance constantly.
Mm.
I
Yes.
don't get people welcoming, going, yes.
Yay,
I
talk
get
about
I
this
get
more.
I get no before I get yes. I will always
Yeah.
generally get the yes, because I think everyone does want to talk about this, and
Yeah.
they just don't know how.
Yes.
But resistance does have this way of chipping at you. No matter
Mhm.
how, like the negativity, like no matter how strong you are, no constantly chips at you, chips and chips and chips. And I've been feeling a bit sort of in a low.
Mm.
But I've been reminded of this week. I listened to some great podcasts. One was with Brené Brown and a friend of hers who
Mm.
talks about finding your joy as an activist,
Yeah.
and the ebb or flow of life, that sometimes you are going to just slow down
Mhm.
and question. And then also ikigai. Ikigai
Yeah.
is the Japanese concept of purpose, living a life of purpose, and what is your purpose. And so yeah, so it's I've certainly slowed down at the moment in the
Yes.
journey, but
And
I
and
haven't
it's
given
that
up.
can be, yes. Yeah. And so thank you so much for bringing and taking us with you on your journey, and also for pointing out some beautiful exercises or methods to look into. Brené's work is beautiful, and then also the ikigai. Thank you for pointing that out, because it's, and also the finding your joy and going with the ebb and flow of life. Like our bodies really need also some resting time in the middle every now and then, and that means we cannot always be in the high energies. We need to kind of ground them back to earth and go a bit lower sometimes too, right? And
Yeah. And look, it's a bit
rebuild.
challenging totally. And when you are trying to inspire people and I guess support and help,
Mm,
you feel like you have a responsibility to sort of sometimes always just be the hero.
mm,
And you can often feel a bit guilty or question like I wouldn't say your worth, but like it's just kind of I guess feel a bit dissatisfied with yourself because you aren't like out there shining the light constantly. But we're human.
mm.
and,
Yes.
and the curveballs keep coming, and so even when you're out there making change and being a change maker,
Mhm.
you've still got living life and all the other stuff that's coming at you, and figuring out who you are, and your purpose can shift and change and evolve. And
Yes.
yes, and so it is honoring that. And it's
Mm,
this has been, for me, this particular year has definitely been about honoring and understanding that, as well as part of transformation and
yes.
transforming trauma into triumph. And it's a constant journey and story that keeps happening.
Mm. Oh, wow. Just breathing, breathing all of this beautiful conversation in. Thank you so much for daring to go where you took us, and um, for showing us this beautiful example of how one can truly transform trauma into triumph. And just also looking at the time, want to respect the time. So I just felt like moving a bit towards towards ending today's podcast and session. And before we go there, just a couple of things to touch base on. You already shared some exercises that one can do, or some podcasts that one can listen to, but is there maybe something that you do yourself, or that you take your clients or your audiences along in as a form of an exercise that you might be willing to share here with us?
Well, it's for me, it's actually there's a couple of parts to the process. And because we are talking about sexual violence, and something I haven't actually mentioned before, which I would like to mention because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
So basically what I do in most days, pretty much every single day, I'm constantly healing every day.
It's a daily practice.
It is a daily practice, but it doesn't have to be a burden. It doesn't have to be something that feels heavy. You know, it can be really little. I've been doing a lot of, I've really dived deep into Atomic Habits recently as well by James Clear, but he's very profound with regards to how just doing little things and taking little steps. But for me, it is really about, so it's about body, it's about mind, it's about spirit, but it's also about your sexuality and your sexual well-being. Particularly around sexual violence. But I would say, as any human walking this earth, it's such a neglected topic. Yet we are all sexual beings as well. And so basically, with regards to a practice, I have a practice every day that looks at those 4 aspects. And so my day starts with yoga and meditation. Seriously, this morning I did only 10 minutes of yoga because that's all I had to give. And I did 3 minutes of meditation because that's all I had to give. Then what I do is I do a form of free flow journaling, which is the mind. And I make it free flow because I feel like sometimes journaling can actually be really constraining to the mind because like, you know, this whole notion of always just doing positive affirmations, which have their place, but sometimes you're really not feeling that. So the idea of free flow is I give myself a little constraint. I give myself 2 pages maximum in the journal. And even if I sit down and I feel like there's nothing that's going to come out, I might write a word over and over and over again, just one word that keeps coming up. But it's very interesting what that unleashes normally, because then suddenly, and so the idea of free flow is you just don't censor yourself. You just let whatever is coming out, come out. And it can be so revealing. Often it's just dumping what's in your head out there and honoring it, almost like talking to a therapist or to a friend. And you can acknowledge and recognize it. Also, sometimes you just need it to help get clarity, you know, and find a clear way. And then other times I find lots of answers in it as well. So I do that. So so the yoga and the meditations, my spirit and soul, the writing and the journal, I find is definitely something that is a mind tool for me. I do some form of physical movement every day, apart from the yoga. So based on how I'm feeling. So like if I want to go hardcore and lift weights, I'll do that. But other times I just need to go for a walk, just either listen to nature or put on a nice podcast. Just the idea of moving and shifting stuff, because it helps so much. And then with regards to sexual well-being, that's a real sort of just exploring that in terms of, I often do that a lot through reading at the moment, and just starting to, I really enjoy some of the sacred sexuality movements that are out there. And exploring that specific space, because I feel like that was definitely something that was lacking as a survivor of sexual violence, was the healing from sexual trauma. It's like so taboo. No one even talks about it. So
important.
Absolutely. It's the thing that could remind you of your trauma from the rest of your life if you can't heal from that part of it.
Exactly. And if you can, you can be reminded of the innocence that you have always been through sexuality. Really, it's deep.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I feel like the sexual body, and that it comes in all sorts of ways as well, like even our sexual identity and who we see ourselves in the world in terms of orientation, that's all wrapped up in sexuality as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's so linked in with who we are and how we carry ourselves in the world, how safe you feel as well,
Mm.
and things like that.
Yeah.
So that is kind of the process. And then I feel very fortunate that when I having this practice then allows me to find the resources I need to kind of teach me something new
Mm.
or remind me of something. So I find that, like at the moment, the atomic habits have been very present in my life. And that's led me down a bit of a trail of podcasts. And that's how I came across Brené Brown, because she'd interviewed James Clear. And so all these doorways start opening up because I have this practice that, in this, like particularly the free flow, sometimes a question comes out and I'm like, oh, I need to go and explore that and find some answers. And so then, and there's a lot of amazing resources out there. And then trusting that instinct of like, okay, that's the resource I need right now. And I won't resist it. Let me take it in. Let me absorb what there is for me to learn in this.
Oh, thank you for this, for going so widespread on the four elements of your morning routine, really, and then also the importance of every aspect and what it brings you. I feel it not only brings me value, but I hope that it brings all of the listeners and viewers here as well. I think it's beautiful. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. And may I share one other little thing, because this is actually really important.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
Finding the magic. And I was reminded of it today. People use it, we use different terminology. I always call it finding the magic, because that's kind of like just become my terminology. And what makes me feel really like when I go, just find the magic. So and this is going to sound hard for anyone, particularly anyone listening today that's going through something really difficult right now. Please know that we're all at different stages. So this is not necessarily for now, but maybe it's just something you remember, a little nugget that you take away for later.
Yeah.
Out of every awful, difficult situation that comes and it happens to us, there is just as much good or even greater good that comes out of it as well. And finding the magic is about seeing that. Some people would say gratitude, like having gratitude for something that's good that has happened. You could do it that way as well. It depends on your language. For me, I sometimes finding the magic, because I can't always find the magic in the awful experience, but I can find the magic in the day. Like you can see a beautiful bird, or like just the light of the way the sun's shining, and this is quite magical. So, and that opens up your mind to start looking at the good. But yeah, ultimately, no matter what you've experienced in life, any of the trauma, if you can try and step away and look at some of the good that came from it, and how it's or what it's done for you in terms of evolving in your life and given to you, like what is it given and not taken away from you, you'd be really surprised at how much magic is in the difficult.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I believe it's so important. Yes. Finding the magic. I feel you might have already answered the next question, which is often one about three gifts. Like, what maybe do you have a favorite saying or a favorite motto, or a gift that you or something that you live by? And I feel you've kind of touched base on that.
Yeah, I've got quite. I realized I've got quite a few.
But maybe you've got what else? What else have you got?
Okay, there's one other quote that has always like been profound, like really like something that came up into my space very early on in my healing journey. And I really use it to remind me, particularly because I think when you've gone through childhood trauma as well, you have a lot of patterns that you aren't necessarily proud of. And you do things and you find yourself in these situations, and you want to be different, but you don't know how to be. So this is Wayne. I heard it through Wayne Dyer's work. And it's if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And it's so profound. It's so true. Now, I have a little physical thing that I do. If my brain can't get around that, if I stand there and go, come on, Clay, change the way you look at things. The things you look at change. I do something. This is a bit radical, but you might like it. I will quite literally stand outside and bend over and look between my legs and look at the world from upside down.
Nice.
And just totally change the angle of how I'm looking at the world. And then like observe and see what's going on. And you'd be so surprised that when you stand back up, you're like, okay, I get it now.
I love that so much. It reminds me of what Tony Robbins teaches, that you kind of change your state and you're immediately back into a healthier space in your mind and your emotions. And this example that you just gave us, like just literally bend over, look at the world between your legs from the other side. It's such a beautiful state change. Yeah.
Oh, it's totally. And you know what's so wonderful about it too is it's so childlike. And when we were a child, we have fun. So generally you in the beginning, you feel a little bit foolish, but if you do it somewhere discreet, it's okay. I do it on the street because I find it so fascinating. Somewhere safe though. I don't do it somewhere I'm going to get run over by a bus or anything, but but you feel like really silly, but in a childlike fun way. So it's such a beautiful way of changing state of, even if you're just having a terrible day, just bend over, look at the world from upside down for a moment and come back up and laugh and feel stupid. And everything will have shifted. So,
I love that. Bringing back the childlike wonder, right? I think it's
totally. So I think that would be it for today. I know, but there's probably there's a ton, but that will, more of that for later.
Thank you so much, dear soul. If I could give you a hug, I'd jump through the screen right now.
Do one of these. Thank you, and for you too. I know you've been going through what happened 3 weeks ago would have been a very profound and incredible experience as well, but very difficult.
Thank you for saying that. It was such also a powerful experience, really reclaiming a last, some pieces of myself, working towards it. That I had. There were some images, let's just say that I didn't, that I wasn't ready to look at or avoiding still, while I had done a lot of work on other situations. There were 2 images that needed some more care. And so this past year has been around that. And I feel, wow, it's profound now. Life is changing on so many levels right now. And thank you for saying that. It was a really good experience. There were many experiences, but this was a good one. And I felt like pointing out the beautiful kind of institution in the Netherlands that helped me do this, which giving them a little bit of a shout out. They're called Perspectief Herstelbemiddeling, which would be translated into perspective.
It's victims. I know because I've met them.
Recovering.
And shared my story with the team as well. So I know exactly who you, and I can completely give a shout out as well and say that the work that they're doing is amazing. And it's incredible to know and meet someone who has benefited from that work.
Thank you. Yes. So translated, I think restorative mediation is what that is, what they offer. And it has been so beautiful. I've been guided through, because I've experienced sexual violence with 2 perpetrators. They've guided me with both the persons. And wow. Amazing work they do. And for people here in the Netherlands listening to this, or wherever you're listening from, this type of restorative justice is out there also for you. And
and I was just thinking, so I know we were meant to do the live today, which we didn't end up doing,
Mm.
which I feel fine that we can put that out there. But we said we might do a live anyway, but maybe we can actually do a live around restorative justice.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yes,
because
good
I mean, that's
idea.
what so that for anyone that knows, we connected in the Netherlands when I was in the Netherlands. And I went into prisons and spoke to perpetrators of crime. And got to be very connected to the restorative program. And I'd say that what's happening in the Netherlands is definitely leading and paving a lot of work around the world. So it would be lovely to share. It might be a really nice and a really wonderful way to share a bit more about what that is. And you can share. There's two different perspectives of the experience.
Yes, I'd love to do that. Let's do that. So yeah, we'll be back. Uh, nice. And then in the meantime, we of course put all the information in the show notes, and maybe people now have gotten some beautiful new book titles and podcasts and tips and tricks and tools that they can that they can implement after listening to us today. But if they want to reach out to you and find you, where just for people listening, like just let's also name your website and your social media. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is through the name of the organization, which is Footsteps to Inspire. It's all one word, actually. If you do need to check the spelling, I would say the show notes, but and if there's maybe some subtitles here too that will have it, Footsteps to Inspire. For the website, it's .org. On Instagram and social media, it's like Facebook and that, it's just Footsteps to Inspire. Those are all maintained and managed by me. So, and I say that because in case anyone listening or watching needs to reach out and feels like they want to share their story or ask something, it comes to me. It's not being filtered by anyone else. So please know that there's a level of privacy and honoring your story to know that no one else would know about it. And so you can feel safe to reach out and ask anything.
I love that you point this out, and I hope that people listening may find their way to you and the beautiful work you do.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm in awe to may connect with you this way, to may have listened and learned with and from you today. Thank you so much. You've moved me, and your story and your courage and your beautiful, deep and wide consciousness. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you. Thank you for allowing me the space to share this. It's, I've realized more and more that, being able to share this is part of the work that I do, so that it's available for anyone afterwards. So thank you for giving me that platform.
Oh, really, more than a pleasure. I've also enjoyed it very much, even though we went deep. Like, it has also been very light and joyous and a beautiful conversation. And well, thank you everyone listening or watching. Thank you so much that you've been around with us and that you stayed until the end. And we hope that it's as valuable to you as it was. Well, for us, I wanted to say, but let's keep it with myself. It was very valuable for me too. Thank you again, and sending you a lot of love and light on your journeys onwards. And if anyone here feels like reaching out to Claire, you now know the way. And if you feel like reaching out to me or our team, you'll also find some information on that in the show notes. If you have any questions or tips, tricks, things you'd like to know, or maybe have a topic or an idea that you'd like us to dive into more, feel free to reach out, send an email. You'll find your way through the show notes. Thank you so much again, and sending loads of love.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you.